Guardians, I might have just found one of my new favorite hunter builds, and it's all because of this YouTube comment. Thanks for the inspiration, TronMaridu1398. This build is so much fun to use. Alright, let's get right on into it. This is all inspired from the Strand version of the sealed Ahamkara build, so if you want a really fun Strand build, go check out that video after this one. This Prismatic version is all about dealing as much burst damage as possible, which is becoming more and more relevant in Destiny 2. In most newly added activities, we're seeing more bosses that have less health and a ton of enemies around them. Well, that all plays perfectly into a build like this. That's because we can take the exotic armor, sealed Ahamkara Grasps. With this exotic, we can get a powered melee kill or a finisher to gain nightmare fuel for 7 seconds. Getting another powered melee kill, finisher, or your first kill with a weapon will refresh this buff. And this buff does a few things for you. First, it'll give you 35% more weapon damage, which will stack with later weapon surges. And second, every time you gain nightmare fuel, it also reloads your stowed weapons, meaning that once active, you can consistently get at least one kill before your timer runs out. Then you can swap to another weapon and repeat this process so that you'll never have to reload. Now, having a 35% weapon damage boost and never having to reload sounds like a dream, and it is for most scenarios. However, this has one big hangup. In DPS phases, you need an enemy available to kill, and then you still only get that buff for 7 seconds. Well, this is where Parasite comes in. Parasite is one of, if not the highest single shot DPS, and that's because while loaded, you can get kills to work up to 20 stacks of Worm's Hunger, and this buff provides 10% per stack, meaning that at 20 stacks, you'll get a whopping 200% increased damage on the first shot. Now, in raid-like scenarios, this might be a bit harder to execute since most of the old raid and dungeon bosses don't have enemies around, but in newer content you can easily proc a powered melee kill to gain your 35% buff, pick up an orb for another 22% from weapon surge, add in that 200% from Worm's Hunger, and 30% from weaken. Now your Parasite shot will be dealing 542% more damage. The even crazier thing is that this can be amped up even further in the future, and that's because right now Radiant is overriding the Nightmare Fuel buff. So if this does get patched, your single shot of Parasite can max out at a whopping 671% more damage. Now you could technically push this even further if you transcend, but it's a bit harder to time out and only offers you 5% weapon damage, so I'm not going to count for that in the total damage. And that's the idea for the build, a ton of burst damage by stacking a ton of buffs and debuffs. But this build offers so much more in the rest of the gameplay loop. For now though, let's dive into the build and break down how it works. For the super, I tried out Golden Gun, and while it's viable, Tether is a little bit better because it offers a team-based debuff, and it buffs our Parasite damage to the max. Plus, it pairs nicely with one of our later fragments, so I ended up landing on Tether. For the class ability, the clear best choice is Gambler's Dodge, since we can now use our dodge near enemies to gain back a melee charge, which is what we'll use to proc that Nightmare Fuel. And for the powered melee, I chose to go with Threaded Spike. I found it to be the most consistent at guaranteeing a kill, and it refunds itself based on the number of enemies hit. And while you can use this melee to sever targets, I mainly keep it charged in case I miss my timer and my Nightmare Fuel runs out. For the grenade, I opted for the Swarm Grenade since it's pretty consistent at dealing damage, but it's not an important part of this build, so pick whichever one you want. When it comes to the aspects, the first and most important aspect is Stylus Executioner. This now makes it so that defeating a target that is affected by any debuff will make you invisible. This will constantly proc since nearly everything you do will cause an enemy to gain a debuff. I mean, Strand is going crazy right now, and Unravel naturally spreads to a ton of enemies. And this does also technically make it so that your next melee, while invisible, will apply a small weaken effect, but that's also kind of irrelevant, so don't worry about that part. For the second aspect, you have a ton of flexibility. None of the other aspects truly mesh or synergize with the build, but all will give you some sort of advantage. I landed back on Ascension so that I could consistently become amplified by using our air move while airborne. And amplified does make you move faster, but remember that this season it got a buff so that you also gain 15% damage resistance, and it makes enemies less accurate against you. When it comes to the fragments, I first wanted to focus on our survivability, and that's why for the first fragment I chose to go with Faceted Protection. Now picking up an orb will give us a buff depending on what super we have. In this case we get a Void Overshield, which offers us a bit of a health buffer and 70% damage resistance while active. I also like to pair this with Faceted Protection. That way while we're surrounded we take 15% less damage, which also pairs nicely with the keep damage resistance from being amplified and the Void Overshield. Then I wanted to focus on getting our abilities back quicker, which is why I chose to go with Facet of Hope, so that while we have any elemental buff active, we gain 60% class ability regeneration rate, which will lead back to more powered melees and more Nightmare Fuel. Then I chose to go with Facet of Balance, so that rapid light-based kills will give 10% melee energy, and rapid darkness-based kills will give 10% grenade energy. And for that last fragment slot, if it gets patched, I highly recommend Facet of Dawn, so that you can easily become Radiant for even more burst damage. However, until then, I chose to go with Facet of Courage, so that all of our light-based abilities will deal 10% more damage against enemies with a darkness debuff. And if you're enjoying the video, how about you deal a ton of burst damage to that like button? Alright, let's get right back to it. So what does this look like in action? Well, there are two main gameplay loops for this build. First, let's talk about the ad clearing portion. In this rotation, you mainly want to start by getting a powered melee kill to proc that Nightmare Fuel. In harder content, you can weaken an enemy first to guarantee the kill. Then kill with your primary weapon until you either run out of ammo or your 7-second timer is about to run out. Then swap to your special weapon and do the same thing. I like to perpetually swap between my special and my primary weapon to keep up that Nightmare Fuel and auto reload my weapons. That way we can keep our Parasite stowed in our back pocket, charged at its 20 stacks. Keep in mind that you can use this to quickly kill champions or mini bosses, since it'll be easy to work back up to 20 stacks. The second type of rotation is our DPS rotation. Now the first half of this looks the same no matter what, but the second half of it will change based on the boss and if it has enemies around it. I like to start by transcending if possible. Pulling out your Parasite, make sure that you're still near an enemy when you pop that tether so that you can quickly score a powered melee kill. And if you carried in Weapon Surge, then all your buffs will be active, and your little worm will nuke the boss. The second half of this is if you do have a ton of ads nearby. After shooting off that first Parasite shot, I then like to reload my Parasite and shoot another to reproc Nightmare Fuel, then swap to my backup DPS weapon. When I get to my primary, I then like to score a few more weapon kills to gain more Worm's Hunger stacks. That way, when I get back to my Parasite, it'll deal even more burst damage. The only other thing to note about the gameplay loop is that grenades can be used freely whenever you want, and if you don't have your powered melee charge or you just want to extend that Nightmare Fuel, you can perform a finisher. So let's talk about ways to improve the build. For stats, I like to shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline. Then I go for at least 50 mobility and pour the rest into strength. Remember, we can easily become amplified, which will give us 50 mobility, which is why I shoot for that 50 mobility at a base level. And when it comes to the armor mods, for the helmet mods, I first like to take a siphon mod that matches our primary weapon to help create a ton of orbs by getting rapid kills. Then I bring a special ammo finder to help create even more special ammo bricks, which will be useful since we will be using our secondary weapon a ton. And finally, I bring a special ammo scout. That way, any special ammo bricks that we create will also be available for our team, which is really strong this season when we pair it with the artifact perk Gold from Lead. And when it comes to the gauntlet mods, I first like to bring firepower so that grenade kills will create an orb every 10 seconds, though you could swap this out for heavy-handed if you want your melees to create orbs instead. Then I bring two dexterity mods. Mainly, I like to bring a solar primary weapon to make the most out of our weapon surge. So we will do one solar dexterity, and the other one I like to match to our special weapon, which in my case is a stasis dexterity. Since we don't need to reload, I aim to swap weapons as quick as possible. That way I can make the most out of our Nightmare Fuel. For the chest mods, like in most builds, in most content I'm recommending 3 resistance mods, 2 elemental to match the activity, and 1 concussive dampener. But the most important thing is to just match it to the activity and the enemies that you're facing. As for the leg mods, I'm bringing 3 solar weapon surges. That way, while we have armor charge active, we gain 22% weapon damage for all of our solar weapons. That's why I like to make sure to take a solar weapon in the energy slot, as well as Parasite, which is also a solar weapon. As for the class mods, I first like to bring Reaper, so that after we use our class ability, our next weapon kill will create an orb. Then I bring Powerful Attraction. That way I can pick up any nearby orbs whenever we use our dodge. And finally, I bring Time Dilation. That way our weapon surge will last longer, which is really nice for those DPS phases. And when it comes to the artifact, the great thing about this build is that it doesn't heavily rely on the artifact for its insane damage. So you can take things like Gold from Lead for more heavy ammo, Flashover to deal more bolt charge damage, or even Unraveling Orbs if you bring a Strain backup weapon. But at the end of the day, none of these perks make or break the build. They're just a nice bonus depending on the weapons that you bring. And when it comes to the weapons, I usually like 2 different loadouts. You either have your extended DPS phase loadout or your normal play loadout. For extended DPS phases, I like to bring a backup solar DPS weapon. So in the kinetic slot, I like to bring my favorite primary weapon. That could be the Multi-Mock with kinetic tremors and attrition orbs, Fatebringer with explosive payload and elemental honing, but honestly, just bring whichever one is your favorite. Alternatively, in normal play, I like to bring a solar primary. So in this slot, I like to bring a decent backup weapon. Rocket-assisted sidearms like Tanisha's Mastery with air trigger and chill clip felt really strong, offering good damage and ammo economy. However, it won't deal as much boss DPS, so just keep that in mind. And for that energy slot, for extended DPS phases, I like to bring that solar DPS weapon. This depends on the boss you're facing, but something like Aramite with Envious Assassin and Control Burst is a really good option. Or you could take Keen Thistle, which can roll with Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch. Though for normal play, I mainly like to take a solar primary. Typically, when choosing a solar weapon, I like to go with a weapon with heal clip. Though for this build, you don't need to reload, so my favorite option was actually Callus Mini Tool. That way we can constantly proc Unrelenting for healing and Incandescent for more damage and easy ways to proc invisibility. But honestly, any solar primary that can add in more damage is all that you need. And in the heavy slot, the number one option is Parasite, since it is the main purpose of this build. However, you still could opt for a really strong burst DPS weapon like Hezen Vengeance, which can roll with Overflow and Bait and Switch to unload a ton of rockets all at once. Well, there you have it, Guardians. This build maximizes the amount of burst damage you can do, all while melting through ads in the ad clearing portions. And if you want to see 5 more Hunter builds geared for episode Heresy, then go check out this video here. But remember, mastering this build is only the beginning. Experiment with different combinations and tweak your loadout to suit your playstyle. If you found this video helpful or just enjoyed seeing a new perspective, feel free to like the video and comment down below on what you might change or how you'd improve this sealed Parasite build. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech, signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.